All right, everyone, welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Dusik from Lilburn PD in Georgia. He has 22 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to Words of the Wise. Thank you so much for being here, Chief
Thank,
Dusik.
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. No, I'm really looking forward to having a conversation. I was hoping that maybe we can start with a little bit of background. Tell us who you are and, what did the last 22 years look like for you?
Sure. Um, we started out my career in Florida for 2 years. I was in the city of Leesburg, which is about 30 miles, I guess, west of it, Orlando. Um, I'm from here originally, so I was young. I missed home. I decided to start looking in for a police job here, and I was actually looking in the newspaper back then. We had newspapers, right? And I saw an article that said, "Hey, City of Lilburn's hiring." Even though I'm from here in Georgia, I've never been to the city of Lilburn, but I applied at a couple different places, applied with Lilburn, and they were one of the first ones to call me back. So I interviewed with them and they hired me. A little bit different that I had a certification in Florida. So I had to go to the police academy again here in Georgia. Once that was completed, I started here. I've done every facet of police work from patrol to riding the motorcycle, writing tickets, um, crime suppression unit, supervision from sergeant into lieutenant. I was the commander over our investigations division, and then our special operations division as a captain. And then I was selected to become police chief. I'll be 2 years on September 11th.
Wow. I always like to ask this question because I'm always really genuinely curious. Was police chief like on your list of things that you wanted to do and wanted to achieve, or did you just
Yeah.
find yourself in this place, 22
No,
years
yeah, it's kind of a wild story the way things work, but no, I never wanted to be a police chief. I did want to aspire to be a captain, and that's where I saw my career kind of going, just maintaining that position as a captain, because the previous chiefs, a lot of headaches in the job. But once the former chief departed, we kind of had a situation where we weren't sure what direction the department was going. I was a little concerned about some of the candidates, so I decided that I would put in as well because they were looking for candidates externally as well as internally, and it was a statewide search. So there was people from all over the state of Georgia that have applied to be the chief as well. The way I felt about it is, I've worked for this department for 20 years and almost 20 years at a time. And, it was just hard for me to see somebody walk in the door that's never set foot here before and start changing things around. Um, and no one knew the department better than I did. I'm one of the longest employed people here at the department, and I knew what changes need to be made and what direction it needed to be going, whereas somebody else didn't. So that was kind of my inspiration for applying for the position, and I was fortunate enough to be selected.
So in your mind, you're like, captain is high enough where I feel like, I'm in a really good leadership position. I've achieved a lot in my career, but I don't have the headaches that come with being chief. And then when it came up for, um, the opportunity to be chief, you were like, if it's not me, who's it going to be?
Sure, and then the future is unknown, so
Yeah.
I rolled the dice, and here I am.
Yeah, I love that story. Today we have the plan to talk a lot about mental wellness, and I know that that's something that's really important to you. And one of the things that you said to me was that the human brain isn't built to see trauma on a consistent basis. How have you seen that show up, in either your team or even in yourself, just over the years? How have you seen that cumulative trauma show up on and off the job?
Yeah, so to kind of go back to what we were talking about, they say that the average human maybe has 2 to 3 traumatic events in their whole life. You
Yeah.
know, you may roll up on an accident where somebody's deceased, or somebody you go to a store and there's a robbery, uh, maybe once or twice in your lifetime. Police officers are doing that, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, and and the brain is a funny organ. You basically have to push all that away to continue what you're doing. So, for instance, if you respond to a call involving a child on a bicycle that has been hit and killed, and the parents are out there and they just can't get unconsolable, and that's what you're dealing with. And then the next call you go to is somebody stole a bicycle, and this person's so upset that kids are on their lawn stolen bicycles, and it's like your brain is still on the child that died. Those images are in your head, but you yet have to train yourself to be professional and deal with the next call. And it's a roller coaster. It's a mental roller coaster, and it's it can be very traumatic for people that, and you get that post traumatic stress going from those types of calls over and over and over. And there's certain calls that will always stay with you. I mean, I've been to several deceased people calls where there was trauma, and some of them I can't remember, but there's a couple that did occur that I'll never forget my whole life. Know their names and everything because it just stuck with me like that. Over time, these officers uh, they don't know how to handle it, right? They don't know how to help themselves. So then they start self-medicating, and that's where the real problems are.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks about alcohol and drugs, but there's all kinds of ways to self-medicate. And you know, they always say that police officers don't trust anybody; they're jaded, and there's a lot of truth to that because you're constantly dealing with people on their bad side, and they're constantly dealing with people that are lying to you. So that bleeds over into your personal life, and that can be very problematic, especially for your family, especially for people that you associate with, and that's just kind of a tough spot to be in. But that's seems to be generally how a lot of officers end up if they've been in this career for many years.
Yeah. Are you seeing, I mean, when we talk about wellness, it's like, how can we get in front of those things? How can we offer maybe more positive outlets so that it doesn't result in that escaping, numbing, like you said, self medication state? Why do you think people are still maybe so resistant to being proactive? And it does tend to kind of get to that point where now there's a problem. Now you're turning to alcohol or overspending or gambling or whatever that is for that particular individual. Why do you think that people are still so resistant to, trying to have more of those healthy coping mechanisms to be able to offload those things instead of letting them pile up over a 20, 30-year career?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is law enforcement. We are the ones that go to people when they have problems, right? We're the fixers.
Mm,
We're the ones that go to people when they're in need and they need help. That's our job. If we are in danger, we handle it ourselves. We don't have anybody else to call, right?
yeah.
Uh, we're it. So I think that bleeds over into the personal life. I shouldn't have to worry about stuff because I'm the fixer. I'm the one that's going to handle this. And it's like, well, your family say, well, it's not going to hurt you to talk to somebody, or you may need some help. And no, I'm not going to do that because I'm a big bad police officer. I can handle it. I've dealt with shootings and fights. This is just this, and I can handle this. And I think another reason too is that there still is a stigma. 20 years ago when I started, if you went to the command staff and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to hurt myself. I have this going on in my life," or "I went to this call that's really upset me," you have the older school guys that have been there for 30 years, so it's like they're totally different generation and
Mm,
schools of thoughts on thinking things, and they would probably just make fun of you and say suck it up and let's go, and push it to the side, or hey, if you can't handle this job, maybe this isn't the job for you. Or if you go to command staff and say, hey, I just have these thoughts, I want to hurt myself, and they're like, well, there's no way that you're going to be on the streets with a gun, protecting the citizens, you're going to lose your job, sort of thing. So I think they believe that, and it's like, well, if I do that, then I'm going to lose my job, and this is the only thing that's providing for my family, and I can't lose my job. So I'll do what I normally do and just pack it in the box and push it to the other side of the brain and self medicate. So that's the two reasons that I really believe that officers do that.
yeah. And I can see that. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations, about stigma, and I can see how I think you don't know what you don't know, and when you have an older generation that didn't have those resources or those conversations, and it was that like, suck it up, keep moving mentality, and you don't know the other side of the coin, you don't know anything other than that, then I could see how that would be challenging as maybe a younger generation coming in who, maybe is more open to talking about these things because there is more awareness, there is more of a conversation, and there being kind of like a clashing of generations, if you will, where people are like, what do you mean? Like, just be tough. And we see what has happened over time with that mentality, right? We see um, worst case scenario that can happen. And I know that PTSD and mental health is something that you're especially passionate about, and you have some personal stories and experiences as to why. Are you willing to share that with our listeners?
Oh, I'd be certainly happy to. Yeah. So, my dad was a firefighter his whole career. He worked for the DeKalb County Fire Department, which is it's about 20 miles from here, DeKalb County. We're in Gwinnett County. And so his whole career as a firefighter, and he retired after 30 years. Was very proud of that. Um, my dad ended up committing suicide, and which is not very uncommon for people who do retire out of public safety, EMS, fire department, and police. Uh, and he's my best friend, so it was really really hard for me. And it's and then seeing other people do that when they retire, I learned that there definitely was a link to that. And I definitely believe in my heart that when we make this job our identity, and it's something that, again, like we were talking about, we're very not trusting of people, right? Everybody's bad, we're good, so we tend to stick together, and we tend to be a tight brotherhood where if somebody's going to hurt us, we're going to protect them, and vice versa. We put our lives in each other's hands, so it's a strong bond, and that becomes our identity. So you go through your whole career. It's your 30-year career, and then your department hands you a plaque, says, "Hey, appreciate your 30 years of service. We'll send you a card on Christmas," and that's it, and you're replaced. And you did such a great job, or you thought you did, but they've replaced you, and now your identity's gone. So you're at home. Who am I? I'm not a police officer anymore, and that's who I am, but I'm not, and that's very, very detrimental to especially retirees, um, people who have made that their identity.
Yeah. I would imagine that it's accumulation of both, right? It's the trauma over time that's not dealt with. And then, like you said, when you feel like you've lost everything and you don't know who you are outside of your career, and now you don't have your career anymore, I would I can only imagine how difficult that could be. And, through conversations on this podcast, we've had an emphasis of like, how do you relay that message to people? Like, how do you promote that separation between work life and home life? How do you um, encourage your team to, have hobbies and interest outside of the career? How do you prepare them for retirement? So when they do get to the end of this career, they understand that. To me, I think two things can happen at the same time. Two things can be true at once. And I've had experience in my life where, I've had that reality check of feeling like I was irreplaceable and then understanding how replaceable I truly am. And it's a really, really tough experience to go through. But I think that two things can be true at once. You can have had a long and successful career and done an amazing job and be so, so valuable while also be replaceable at the same time. Um, how do you, as an organization, or how do you think that organizations in general can do a better job of having those conversations and preparing people for the reality of retirement and, encouraging them to not put their entire identity into this career?
So one of the things I do is it doesn't matter how many years a person's been an officer. When I hire them, I have kind of what you have the HR orientation, but I do a personal orientation, and I have a presentation, and it goes from talking about my philosophies on law enforcement and the way I run my organization. Um, you know, Talking about how our department treats people versus you know other perceptions, how other people perceive us. Um, I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want these officers going out there and getting hurt and doing silly stuff. I don't want to get sued either because they're aggressive. And, I go over just because you can do something doesn't mean that you have to, right? integrity. And it's just kind of my philosophy from law enforcement. And one of those things we cover your identity. Don't make this place your identity. Don't, we talk about self-medication and your identity. So that's one of the very first things I do. It doesn't matter if it's a rookie that's never been on the street a day in his life or somebody that's coming from another department that's a 20-year veteran. They all get the same presentation. So to me, I think that's very important, just to make sure that, look, this is what happens, especially to the younger ones. This is what happens. I know it's exciting, and this job's exciting, and you think this is going to be your whole life, but don't. You cannot do that.
Did you have that philosophy and that perspective prior to your dad passing, or do you think that that experience kind of shaped the way that you view wellness and the way that you lead now today?
Well, I certainly didn't know before he passed, and I was left with just a bunch of questions. That's what he left me with. So I think in my journey to find these questions, I've kind of realized that and learned that, and the people I've spoken to, kind of putting the puzzle pieces together,
Yeah.
um, kind of fostered that philosophy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it 100% does. I mean, I am a firm believer that the hardest things that we go through in life can be the biggest opportunity for us to help others. And because you had that experience, which I can only imagine how incredibly challenging and difficult that was, it's now your opportunity as a leader to spread that message, to your team and to give them, the education and awareness around this topic that maybe you didn't have before, and the ability to impact people's lives moving forward. Because you don't want to see that happen to anybody else, and you don't want their kids to feel what you did in that moment. And so I would imagine that, it's maybe a little bit of I don't know what I want to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, it allows me to kind of, it took a long time to
Yeah.
finally come to terms and cope, but it allows me, even though I've coped, to be comfortable and cope a little more, because you know, if I didn't pass on that knowledge, then I wouldn't be able to live with myself if somebody else did the same thing, I guess.
Yeah. And is that something that you do share? Like, do you share your personal story with your team and,
I
and,
do. I
and
do. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We teach the PTSD class, and that's one of the things that I talk about is my personal story because I think it's important. People commit suicide for many reasons. They do, but when you can kind of start pinpointing why people do it, especially in the criminal justice field or public safety field. And there's so many common denominators. Uh, we just can't ignore it, And I think the 20-year war and Afghanistan, that kind of was a tipping point as far as mental health being okay to talk about. All these veterans are coming back and killing themselves. So many a day are taking their own lives, and they finally said, "Hey, something's going on. We got to address this." So it's become normalized, and the stigma has kind of fallen to the wayside because of that. And in law enforcement, it's no different. And I'm thankful for that because things were different 20 years ago when I started.
Yeah, 100%. Do you think that it's important as a leader to have that vulnerability and to have that ability to share things with your team? Because the one thing that I really commend you and anyone who I've talked to on this podcast, who's been in this career for as long as you have, um, I can imagine how difficult it would be because you did grow up in a time, like you said, where there was a big stigma and it wasn't talked about, and vulnerability was weakness and all of these things. And now in leadership, I hear stories like this where you're like, I'm being vulnerable and I'm sharing these things with my team. And, it takes a lot of learning and growth on your end to come from a generation that didn't do that to now being, open and available to try to influence the next generation in a positive way. Do you think that that's a strength as a leader to be able to do that?
Absolutely. Men generally don't want to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
especially law enforcement officers. I mean, as a law enforcement officer, we're going back to I'm the fixer. I'm the tough guy. I can handle my own stuff. In reality, you're a human being. that's being exposed to stuff that you shouldn't be exposed to. So yeah, I think it's a very good strength to have, and it's okay. Um, you know, there's a line between getting upset every time you go out to a call. You got to go and handle your business, but it's okay to also, after that's done, to talk. I'm not saying that if you go to a scene and you're just unable to do the job because you're so upset, you got to put that part to the side. I mean, we got to be able to help who we're going out there to help, and it's okay later at that time to be vulnerable. And still, there's just some that's no, I'm good, and in reality, they're not.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what I said before. Like, I really do believe two things can be true at once. You can be strong and courageous, and you can also be vulnerable and open. They aren't opposing things, they can be true at once. And I think that so often people are looking at it saying, well, if you're vulnerable, then that means that you're not strong. And I completely disagree with that. I actually think that it takes more strength and courage to say that impacted me, or I'm gonna need a minute, or I'm gonna need, to be able to offload some of these things in a healthy way. For me, like the hard things that I went through, because I've done it all. I've done all the escaping and numbing and unhealthy coping mechanisms to try to deal with my own personal traumas. And for me, that was easier. It was easier to drink it away or to avoid it than it was to deal with it. And so to me, I think that the hard work sometimes lies in what you said of the sharing, the vulnerability, and the willingness to be able to do things in more of a healthy, proactive way.
Well, like you said, it's work. Some people don't want to put in the work because it's uncomfortable, right? So, that's a challenge in itself.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about this PTSD class that you teach. Are you able to kind of walk us through like the main components of what you cover and how you try to equip your people with the tools to be successful?
Sure. So the class, I mean, it's a pretty, I don't want to say basic class, but I mean, it's there's a lot of science that goes into trauma in the brain, and
Mm.
those people that I research on, they so much smarter than me. So I kind of try to
Mhm.
not dumb it down, but we're police officers,
Mm.
we're not scientists. So we kind of talk about what trauma is, and what it how it affects the brain, physically affects the brain, the chemicals in your brain, and we talk about how this job is different than any other job, and we go into where our brain's not it's not supposed to see what are these traumatic events day after day after day, and then we talk about put them into compartments, and a lot of people don't realize that's what they're doing, instead of talking about the situation. And then we talk about the coping mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms, unhealthy coping mechanisms, um, that if you're going to be in the career, you're going to see these sort of things.
Yeah.
But we have to be able to, we know that it's going to cause trauma. So, how do we, what is our outlet for that? And then, of course, we go into the stigma, and that, how I make a promise to the department. If anybody comes to me, they're not going to get fired because there's no concern there. We want to get our officers help. And we will. If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I need to confide in you this," um, you know, we will pay for a sessions with a psychiatrist, and a lot of departments don't do that. They say,
Yeah.
"Hey, you got EAP, right? You can do that through work," but we'll take a step further, and because I want to ensure they're actually talking to somebody and getting help, because just telling somebody that you can go to EAP on your own dime, we'll provide this, but after this many sessions, you got to pay for it. That's kind of like saying, I really don't care. Just, don't bother me with this. So it's important, I think, that my officers do know that. Um, you know, it's just, it's just something that I think in 2025 law enforcement, everybody should be having this conversation to their employees, anybody in a leadership position.
Yeah. And how have you found the receptiveness to it? Do you feel like by having the conversation and having the awareness around it that you're seeing that stigma start to go away, where people are like really engaging with it and understanding that, there are options for them that don't necessarily mean that they're going to lose their job, or, that doesn't mean that they're broken and that they can't get help for the things that they need. Like, are you starting to see kind of that momentum build through these classes?
Sure. Yeah, I do think so. You, of course, you have those from the older generation that are,
Sure.
they're not to be broken. So, and then that's okay. But the younger ones, they do. Another program that we got on board with is a peer support program,
Mhm.
and it's pretty unique. It's put on by the state of Georgia. It's a 40-hour course, and you become a certified counselor. But what's unique about this is, a lot of times officers that work with one another, they may be a certified counselor, but they may not want to share certain things with them because they know them. So other agencies, sister agencies in the area, have the same programs, the state program. So the next city over, I can say, okay, listen, if you need to talk to somebody, this is the program you want to do. Let me call the coordinator at this other city, and we'll get you in touch with somebody you don't know.
Yeah.
That way, there's they're more apt maybe to be honest. Likewise, that other agency can call us and say, hey, we have an officer that needs to talk to one of your peer counselors, and we'll get them set up. The cool thing about it is it's uh, absolutely confidential unless there's been a crime committed or they're going to go hurt somebody. It's state protected law. It's confidential. So I cannot go as a chief to them and say, hey, so and so, you talk to them. What's going on with them? They legally cannot tell me, and that's a good thing. It's how it should be. So it's pretty exciting. We just rolled that out. So I've sent an officer or two over to another city to talk to somebody. They were going through stuff in their personal life, and they came back and said, "Hey, that was really awesome. I'm glad I did that. I feel much better." So
Yeah.
I think it's very positive.
Well, I would imagine that through those experiences, if someone has a positive experience and they're willing to share that with other people, then other people will start to build trust in the resources as well, and realize that, oh, like this person did it and like it really helped them, and maybe that means I can do it too, and so it starts to build, the foundation for that moving forward. I'm also appreciative that you mentioned like stuff in your personal life, because I think so often we forget that, like, yes, there are so many things that you experience and see on the job, but that's only a part of your life. You have this whole other area of your life that can also bring all the emotions, happiness, stress, sadness, all the things. And to be able to recognize that you are human, and as much as, and maybe you have a difference of opinion, because you guys are so good at, compartmentalizing and being able to like push things to the side, and, but for me, like, I don't know how you can truly shut it off and not let personal life impact work life and work life impact personal life in one way or another. I feel like there's always maybe some seepage, as much as you maybe try to not let that happen. How do you get that message, to people that, like, you're gonna experience stuff at home and you're also gonna experience stuff at work, and regardless of what it is that you're experiencing, we've got you.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought that up because that's absolutely true and correct. There are, I mean, I see it all the time. Somebody's having a fight with their wife, or somebody's maybe going to lose their house, or their kids in trouble, or somebody's parents, in hospice or something.
Yeah.
And that's what's on your mind. And it's actually very dangerous because imagine these officers going to these calls and their mind is on that, right? It's not necessarily I'm going to this call and okay, I've been to this house before, I know the layout, I know I've arrested this guy before. He fights every time. Um, he's always drunk. Instead of thinking those things through or reading your CAD notes, okay, this is what the dispatcher's saying, you're basically thinking about your problem and you're on autopilot, right? And then you're going to that call and you're not 100%. So it's actually very dangerous to be on duty with those things on the forefront of your mind. Um, so, again, like I tell the officers, they need to come to work with, it's not easy to come to work with a clear head, but if there is something going on, let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's figure out what we can do to help. That way, this is not, the focus of your day because
Yeah.
it could get them hurt or another officer hurt.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you said, because one of the things I've said before, and I do believe this, I don't know if it's very like widely received in this way, or thought about in this way, but I think wellness is safety. Like, wellness is safety training. Wellness does equal safety, and if you are in what we talked about before, the impact that stress and trauma have on your brain. If you can't make effective decisions in an environment that requires you to make effective decisions where it could impact your safety, the safety of the community, the safety of your team, then there's a core foundational thing that needs to be addressed, which is the wellness component, right? Like we have to get you in a space where you can make effective decisions for the safety of everyone around you and yourself. And so my hope is that, as we progress, it's that safety, wellness, training, all of it becomes one idea and it's all intertwined with each other because I think that's when the stigma starts to go away even more. I think right now wellness is kind of on its own little island where everyone's like, like I don't need that or like, and I wouldn't say everybody, but the people who are like, like the woo woo, like I don't need that. But if it is presented in a way where it's like wellness equals safety, this is also training and it's all in one. And just like you do like your annual, firearms training, you're also doing annual wellness training and they impact each other. So I'm glad that you said that because I think that we forget that you have to be in a position in your life and in your career to be able to effectively perform the functions of your career. And it doesn't just mean physically. It also is mentally.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that kind of gone to the wayside too. You'll see officers that are out of shape and, physically out of shape, and it's just as important as mental health, physical health. And if that officer can't run to get to another officer to help them, or get to a citizen to help them, then they're not really doing the community any good. So there's a balance that you have to have that physical and mental fitness.
Yeah. And you had said this to me offline that they should really be treated in the same way. And I completely agree with you. I've heard, so many times, like let's say someone is out on the streets and they pull a hamstring. You know, no one is going to bat an eye or think that you are weak or silly or whatever the word they want to use. If you actually get hurt physically on the job and like you need to go see a doctor, to get that taken care of. But still, yet I think in the mental side of things, if there's a mental injury of some sort, PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, if something like that happens, there's still kind of like this judgment of people being like, ugh, and my hope is that just like an injury on your physical body, if there's something going on mentally, that those two would be viewed the same, that there's no bad of an eye if you need to go to the doctor and get some professional help for that.
Yeah, and there's also a stigma about antidepressants, right? So there's stigma that hey, this person's crazy, or this person is not fit for duty. Well, I mean, if you have an internal injury, or a virus or something, the doctor prescribes you medicine, you're going to take it, okay, to get better. And it's the same thing with chemical imbalance. If that's what it is, they give you medicine to make it better. But people still say, hey, this person, I heard this person's on, whatever medication, and I don't know if I can trust them. And that stigma also has to go to the wayside, I think, at least in 2025.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that there's progress. And I don't know if you feel that, where you are too in, the last 20 years that you've been in this career. I've been in this wellness space for the last 8 years, and I've seen the progression, moving in that way, where I think that at least now there's a conversation and there are people who are really laying that foundation. And I think that we can only keep going forward with it, right? Because you can't go backwards. Like once you know the challenges and the things and you have personal experience with these things, you can never go back to the way things were before because now you have a better awareness of what could happen if those things aren't addressed. And so I feel that momentum, but I always like to refer to it as kind of like the Titanic. Like it's a really big ship to steer and it's not going to like flip around 180 overnight. It's going to take some time. But my hope is that, as the younger generation starts to come in and they do have these resources and there is education and awareness and action, which I think is really important, then that's going to be the new norm. they're not going to know a world or, a profession that doesn't have a focus on wellness and doesn't have resources to help. And um, as they start, rising through the ranks and entering into leadership positions, they will continue to prioritize those things long term. So that's my hope.
That's awesome.
Do you think that it's going to happen? Do you see it?
I could see that. I could see that. You're going to have those that just won't listen. Um,
Yeah.
Again, being a young officer, it's the most exciting job, and at least for me, it was the most exciting job in the world, and that's all I want to do is go catch bad guys. And the first thing, at least back then, any officer would do is get the equipment book that you can order stuff from, and order a bunch of stuff you don't need just because you're a police officer now and you can. And you know, again, that's making that your identity. And
Yeah.
if we can, start that conversation from the very beginning before day one, and remind them of that through their career, I definitely could see a shift.
Yeah. In that same, train of thought for the younger officer, for someone who is brand new to this career, what words of wisdom would you give them? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Well, the biggest thing for me, and this kind of goes with my philosophy of law enforcement, uh, there's many names for police officers, but the one I like to use is peace officer. That's an older, antiquated term. That's what they were called, back a long time ago. But that's our job, right? It is to enforce the law, but it's also to uphold the peace. Um, People go through stuff all the time, and you meet them at their worst. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. That's very important to know. People are human beings like anybody else. There's homeless people now that were millionaires, right, at one point. There's people out there that are paraplegics, quadriplegics, sick, that were, Olympian athletes. So we just don't know their story. So you truly cannot judge somebody till you get to know them. And, you know, the biggest thing is you can tell any new officer is integrity is what you have. You can lose, it takes a lifetime to build your career up, but takes a millisecond to lose it if you don't have integrity. I tell my officers all the time that if you screw up, that's cool, we can fix it. But if you lie, there's no fixing, there's no coming back from that. So having that integrity, treating people right, and one my dad always said is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Yeah, I can go arrest this person, but look at these circumstances. Should we arrest them? you know so just because we have the authority to do something and we shouldn't do it but we do it anyway, that's when the abuse of the authority starts. So those would definitely be my guiding principles to new officers.
Thank you. It was honestly an honor to have you on the show today, so I really, really appreciate your time.
It was an awesome experience. I appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. We'll stay in touch. I appreciate it.
Sounds like a plan.